Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's your friend Bats. My name is Jared. I'm sitting here with my boy Carl the dog, and I wanted to talk about something I talk about with friends of mine, and I haven't really alluded to it or spoken on it too much here on my channel, but I have kind of mentioned it once in a while, and that's what I call Geek Hive Mind or comic book hive mind. And there seems to be a, a connected agreement with certain geek fandoms, and just in, I guess, in fandoms in general, that there's almost like a right opinion and there's also a wrong opinion. And if you almost step out of line of having the wrong opinion in fandom groups, that people like kind of lose it and say that you're just wrong, right? And so I first noticed this when I was about 13, and I got into comics when I was 10. I also got into Star Wars about when I was 10. I think I was in like 4th grade when I had a neighbor kid who was a friend, when you do kids on bikes in the neighborhood, and we went, rode the bus together. And we both liked movies a lot. And he's like, "Have you ever seen Star Wars?" And I'm like, "Oh, I I seen it, but I don't really like it." And he's like, "Have you seen all of them?" And I didn't even realize that there was more than one, because I remember my mom always being like, "Oh, Star Wars is on," and would just turn it on TV, and I would remember, like, there's some robots and a guy in a vest. There was like a girl in a white gown and a guy with like a laser sword. That's all I really remembered as like when I was 10, and I was like, I don't know. And so he loaned me the trilogy on VHS, and which is funny because he had it it was like, before it said New Hope, it said Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, and The Empire Strikes Back. And so I watched it in that order the first time, and I'm like, this doesn't, oh, oops. So I saw it in that order for the first time. And that same Christmas, my mom got me a copy of the Star Wars trilogy because that's what I wanted for Christmas. And in that same time was Batman Forever was coming out in theaters, and I visited my dad on weekends, and I got a Batman comic. And I remember watching the Star Wars movies as a kid and thinking, this is fantastic. These are great. I love these. And I got it. I got my first comic book, and I was like, this is fantastic, and I love it. And I just enjoyed it for about 3 years by myself. And then I had eventually moved to my dad's. And when I was in middle school, when I was 13, remember when it was called junior high? Yeah, I was in junior high. I never went to middle school. It was called middle school after, So when I was in junior high, I was 13 years old, and I got a copy of some graphic, trade paperback graphic novels at a used bookstore. And I still have these copies. But I remember I was getting into comics, and a lot of the guys at the comic book shop and just like other grown-ups, if you will, at the time, were telling me, "Oh, if you want to read a good Batman story, you got to read The Dark Knight Returns." And like everyone said this. So I ended up finding a copy of The Dark Knight Returns at a used bookstore, and I still have this copy of this book. It is very beat up, but it's and everyone told me Dark Knight Returns is the best Batman story ever told. And so I went into this hype at 13 and was like, this sucks, And then I also was told that, like, the same thing, that The Killing Joke is one of the best Batman stories ever told. And at 13, I was like, this kind of sucks. I mean, there's some cool parts, but it kind of sucks. I don't, everyone says that these two are the best Batman stories. And they also said year one. Year one, I was like, this one's cool, But I remember going back, I was like, to the comic book store, and I was like, oh, I read Dark Knight Returns, and everyone was like, isn't it great? I'm like, no, it sucks. And they're just like, no, dude, you don't know, you just don't understand it. And this kind of just went on forever. Even now, at 40 years old, and had been reading comic books, for essentially 30 years, for 3/4 of my life at this point, I still get this kickback where I genuinely enjoy current Spider-Man comics. I think they're fun and they're exciting, and I look forward to reading them every 2 weeks when they come out. And people are like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. It's bad Spider-Man. And that's where I get this, like, this is a hive mind. This isn't real opinions, because if everyone's saying it, am I the crazy one? Or are people saying it for acceptance? And the reason I say, are they saying it for acceptance, is they want to be accepted in their geek space. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to think, they just want to agree with their friends. And it almost seems like there's not a real discussion. So much that, like, and YouTube has really has got a grasp on geek spaces, specifically in comics and in Star Wars. There's channels who will tell you everything is bad in comics all day, every day. And the same with Star Wars. Me, my fiance, and a handful of my friends are all going to go see The Mandalorian and Grogu this Sunday. Today's Friday upon this recording. So if you're seeing it after Sunday on the 24th, hi. But all my handful of normie friends have no idea that the internet thinks that Star Wars is dead and everything is terrible, woke, gay, all these things. They're just like, oh, cool, there's a new Star Wars. Let's go see it. That's it. Right? But there's this weird, like, geek hive mind, this mind control that's going on, where there's all this conversation on the internet in geek spaces on why everything is terrible, and it's really the algorithm, right? The algorithm is the mind control, but we get a lot of talking points of the same things from, like, almost 10 years ago at this point, and there's no original conversation. Like, back to Spider-Man. I have been reading Spider-Man since 2000. I started with Ultimate, and then around in 2003, 2004, a friend of mine had loaned me his Essentials, which were phone book size. If you know what a phone book is, they were like 800 pages of black and white comics on newsprint. And I had read, like, the first, like, 200 issues of Amazing Spider-Man in that style, in black and white, on cheap paper, in cheap trade paperbacks, and I loved it. And now I'm reading the series again now in color in the Epic collections, which are nicer trade paperbacks, and I'm in the 220s. Right? And I'm also reading current Spider-Man, and I have also read basically from JMS all the way to about halfway point of Nick Spencer's run fell off, didn't read volume 6, but jumped back in at volume 7, which is the current run. And people who are probably like in their 20s are complaining about One More Day. And I'm like, dude, you weren't even old enough to read when this happened. Why are you complaining about something 20 years ago? Even 30-year-olds. If you were 10 years old when One More Day happened, why are you complaining about something that happened 20 years ago? And it's just crazy. Like, and now people are still, we're complaining about the sequel trilogy. Like, I remember when I was 12 years old and I found out there's going to be a new Star Wars trilogy. And I was like, that's awesome. Because growing up, I didn't get to see the Star Wars trilogy in theaters. I mean, I saw the special edition re-releases in 97, but I didn't get to, I wasn't there. And so the prequel trilogy was the Star Wars I got to see in theaters. And let's not forget, because people want to rewrite history, everyone at the time in all the geek spaces used to say things like, George Lucas is ruining Star Wars. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a fraud. They hated episode 1. Me? I was almost 14 in May of 99? I was 13 going on 14 in July. I was like, this movie rocks, man. I was a freshman in high school. I was like, this movie friggin' rocks. And then episode 2 came out. Everyone was complaining about it. Episode 3 came out. Everyone was complaining about it. But now, 20 years later, they're like, the prequels are a masterpiece. Blah, 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 blah. It's the sequels that are bad. Are we really rewriting history amongst our beliefs? Are we, I, as a fan, and I don't like using the word fan. I like the word enjoyer. Because when you tell people you're a fan of Star Wars, they think you're a crazy person. And I noticed that there's this real, same mentality amongst Spider-Man fans and Star Wars fans, that it seems that the fandom hates more of the thing that they claim to love than they actually like. If that makes sense, right? So, there is 9 episodes, 2 separate movies, now third one with Mando. People are already hating on Mando. So there is 12 Star Wars movies, and evidently they only like 3.5 movies, right? So mathematically, you don't like Star Wars. And the same goes with Spider-Man, because for the last 20 years, Spider-Man has been separated from Mary Jane. And then there's 20 years before that where he wasn't with Mary Jane. So there's this 20-year window where he was. So again, in the 60 years of Spider-Man stories, 2/3 of it, they don't like. So mathematically, they don't like Spider-Man either. And so there's just this weird mind control with fans. And I feel like a lot of fans don't want to say hey, I actually enjoy it. They just rather go along with repeating YouTuber opinions, right? No one ever talked about Ninja Turtles 3 until Angry Video Game made a video on YouTube, and it started almost the YouTube trend of trashing on, your childhood movies. I saw it in theaters as a kid. I was a kid. It was 93 when it came out. I was 8. Like I didn't really have much of an opinion of it, other than like Ninja Turtles are cool. They're turtles and they're ninjas. And then it's so funny, like now as we get older as adults, we think we have some kind of like sophisticated thought process of like what it should be and overanalyze a children's product. And I am sorry to break it to grown-ups, to adults, but Spider-Man is for kids. Star Wars is for kids. And it's okay, us as adults, to enjoy Spider-Man. It's okay as adults for us to enjoy Star Wars. But let's not forget that it's made for kids. Like George Lucas said, it's made for 12-year-olds, right? It is essentially for 12-year-olds learning about the world through good and evil and tyrannical governments. Like we learned like through a story of like right and wrong, right? Same with Spider-Man. But now that we're in our 40s, we're like, I want Spider-Man to be married to the redhead. And instead of like just being fine with Spider-Man being Spider-Man, like being, down on his luck superhero, that's his whole gimmick. We got to go, oh no, I want him to be married to Mary Jane, or it's just bad. One more day needs to be retconned. Like you don't hear X-Men fans ever going about like, the X-Men have been around since the 60s. We're going on 60 years of X-Men. You would think the Marvel Universe would stop being, bigoted to mutants at this point. You would think, like we would move on, right? Because in the real world, I remember 9/11, and I remember the things people used to say about Middle Easterns after 9/11. And guess what? New York now has a Middle Eastern mayor. That's the real world we're living in now. But in the fictional world, Spider-Man's always down on his luck. The X-Men are going to always be bigoted towards. Star Wars is always going to be action adventure for 12-year-olds. That's just what it is. And it's fine. But the idea that grown-ups think that they know better than the people who create the stuff, and use things like when they don't. I heard this recently. It was it's basically like they're only upset because you didn't get what you expected to get. And so people have been expecting Star Wars to go in a certain direction since like the prequels. And, from what I understand, I've talked to older people. They thought the same with Return, with Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back. They were shocked by a lot of things. They didn't get what they expected. And so it made them mad. And the same goes with Spider-Man, goes with Star Wars, goes with almost every fandom. And it's just stupid. Like, either enjoy it or don't. And in my personal opinion, if you watch content of people just complaining about fandoms, you're kind of dumb. It's like, I'm not trying to be offensive to anyone listening to this, but if you're just like watching people on YouTube who just complain that everything is woke and everything is dumb and, there's this, alleged agenda in all these films and stories and comics and TV, maybe maybe you should just not be into something that you enjoyed at 10 years old, at 40 years old. If you can't get the idea in your head that it's not what you thought it was going to be at 40 because you liked it when you were 10, maybe it's just not for you anymore. Maybe you should take up like fishing or like disc golf. I don't know. That's just my thought. I think there's just some kind of weird mind control amongst basically like the more nerds repeat the same thing, they think it's fact, and it's really not. It's just their opinions being regurgitated by other people saying the same thing. When there's a whole variety of people who read Spider-Man comics, who read X-Men, who read or watch Star Wars movies and get an entirely different experience than, your generic middle-aged man complaining on the internet. But here I am, a middle-aged man complaining on the internet. What do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.